not being flexible today. But anyway, so I want to share that with you, and I want to remind you why I call this this series of videos that I'm doing, when gang stalking gets real. It's because these are things that really happen, and I feel like it's therapeutic for me, and it will be helpful for somebody out there. It'll be helpful for you, hopefully, but I know that I'm not here for everybody, but if I could help somebody, then I feel like I've done my job. The way I came to know my Agent Smith, and if you are familiar with the Matrix, Agent Smith was the villain that kept cloning itself and showing up to fight Neo. These entities tend to replicate, and that's what we have to keep. That's what I want you to keep in mind as I take you through how I came to discover my Agent Smith. I spoke before in regards to my work that I did in the past, which was in direct sales, and direct sales, commission only, and it was very high level sales, because you literally had to prospect, present, as well as pick up the check. So everything, pretty much, you were a small business in a sense. And the company had very notable people. I mean, it was people like a brother named Dwayne Calloway, Dwayne 747 Calloway. He worked for the company. It was, let's see, Mike and Terry Buskey. Dwayne was out of the Houston office, I believe, and then there was Mike and Terry Buskey. They were former hockey players. I believe they were out of St. Louis. There was a gentleman who I considered to be a mentor of mine by the name of Wally Schmader. He was out of the Charlotte area, and he wrote the book Full Contact Leadership, and it was his first job out of college, and I'm sure he became a multimillionaire working with this company. But it required a very high level of discipline, consistency, and just really, they used to call the offices it was the think tanks, or the success labs, they called them, or we called them. And I mean, it was people that were ex-business owners, former doctors, some lawyers. So you were rubbing elbows, if you will, with some of the higher echelon, or esteemed, anyway, echelon. So very, very high level thinkers in this business, And there was another person who worked there, was a CPA, and he worked there, and his name was Alan Heler, a CPA out of Tampa. And mind you, this was a very small, and I say small, unique sales force at that time, on the largest and strongest collection agency, I think, in the world at that time, or in the country at that time. And it was about only maybe 600 of sales reps across the country. So it's probably about 10 to maybe fewer in every state. And so it wasn't large, but we were broke up into states into regions and districts. And you were pretty much with a team, but you were also your own boss. And I met Alan Heler prior to him coming to work for the company. And I want to read you an article that came out that the local newspaper contacted me about. I was a district manager at the time, and out of the blue, they contacted me and they wanted to get my thought on what books I was reading at the time, because they had something in the local newspaper called bibliophiles, and you got to give a review of what books you were reading or had read or recommend. And at this time, my office was really, I had been a district manager now for I've been with the company going on 4 years, but I've been a district manager for about 2.5 years, and my office was just getting ready to really turn that corner, to really take off. And I was feeling really good about myself because I had just came off of, out of a very harsh and not so well resolved divorce, and there was no monetary reward there. So I was like, wow, I'm putting myself and my life back together, and maybe I can get to a level of income that I can be proud of and be happy with, and kind of put the whole divorce thing behind me. And it was a time when just really things were really starting to get good and going well for me. So I was very pleased when the newspaper contacted me. And I want to read to you what the article says. And I'll show you this. But that's the bibliophiles. And it says, my last name was Herring at the time, by the way. And it says, Herring tends to gravitate to books about sales and self-improvement. Herring, the branch manager at Transworld Systems Lakeland office, recently read Selling to Veto. Veto stands for Very Important Top Officer. It's a book by Anthony Parello, and Herring says it's a reference to any sales professional that wants to know how to be effective. But away from work, Herring, at the time I was about 30, I was 34 states in here, reads books that focus on the inner self. And it says, I read those because a lot of us don't tend to give ourselves the attention we need as far as deciding who we are, said the Lakeland resident. One of Herring's favorite books is Dare to Be Yourself, How to Quit Being an Extra in Other People's Movies and Become the Star of Your Own, by Alan Cohen. And I said, I like the book because it's a roadmap to self-discovery. We all have unique gifts to share with the world, but we never take the time to discover the precious gifts that lie within us. Therefore, never knowing the potential and true power we possess. The book that was recommended to her by a former colleague, and now she recommends, is Working with the Law, by Dr. Raymond Hollywell. And it says, the book speaks about how to live wisely and constructively in accordance with divine order. The book uses the word law in place of God. When I say divine order, I mean the life God has set out for us and to be the person He wants us to be. How to conquer life's problems without having to fall, or at least knowing how to get back up. That article came out in 2004. And being a district manager was a very expensive endeavor. Basically, you were responsible for hiring. You were responsible for training sales reps that you hired. You were responsible for maintaining the office, like if any water coolers, all the office supplies. You still were responsible for keeping your sales up. You were responsible for a part of paying for a part of the phone lines. If you had 8 to 10 phone lines in your call center, you were responsible for just basically running and building and keeping the office and maintaining the office. And it was very it was another colleague in the business that she told a story how her manager took her to the office, and when they walked in, he gave her the keys and he said, Here are the keys to the office. Run it. Build an office. If I have to hear from you for any reason, one of us is unnecessary. And basically that's how it was. You were either going to sink or you were going to swim. So it wasn't for the weak at heart. And things were going well in my office, or beginning to really, I was really about to turn that corner. I had built it to where I had some sales reps working in the office. And if you can imagine, it's not easy keeping commission-only sales reps around, because you don't have a check for them at the end of the week. You don't have, there's, unless they went out and made a sale, or if you helped them made a sale, there is not a check at the end of the week. And I never really actually wrote checks. I never gave out checks on Friday. I always wrote them over the weekend, because I went to the office on the weekend to do payroll, and I would give them out on Monday in the Monday sales meeting. But anyway, so I met Alan Heler because he came to interview with me prior to working for the company. He came to interview with me, and I distinctively remember him speaking with him on the phone, because I would always they would always call if I had a ad on, it was monster.com back then, and then it became, I think, Job Indeed or something. But I remember speaking with him and inviting him in for an interview. And the interview consisted of, it was a group interview, maybe, anywhere from 4 to 6 people. And then I would meet with, the manager would meet with them one-on-one, usually, as in the order that they came in, and in the office. So it was the conference room that we would have the initial overview of how, the company worked, what we did. It's commission, it is commission only. Then you would sit down with them one-on-one and say, if this is, to find out if this is something that they would be interested in, what they're looking, if this is something that they're looking for. If so, maybe we might, invite them back for a second interview. So I got down to about 3 people that I still had to invite into my office to sit down and talk. And I remember Alan Heler, he's a CPA out of Tampa, and I remember him saying, "Oh no, Ms. Herring, I can wait. I'm not in a hurry. I can wait." And it got down to the last 2, and it was him and another woman. He says, "Oh, well, she can go. I'm a gentleman. She can go ahead of me. I can wait." So it got to the point where he and I were the only ones in the office, and I met with him one-on-one. And in the process of speaking to him and asking, "Well, what did you think? Do you think this is something you can do?" And he said that he had some ideas about, how he could make the opportunity work for him. He had been in sales before. So out of the blue, well, he actually said that he was going to be out of town. I said, "Oh, you're leaving town." I said, "When are you going to be out of town, and when are you coming back?" And he says, abruptly, "What are you saying? I can't work here?" And at that moment, the way he said it, I was thinking with this attitude, no, you can't work here. But I said to him, I said, "Well, why don't you do this? Why don't you check back with me in a month or so when you come back, and we'll talk then." "Are you saying I can't work here? Are you saying I can't work here? Yeah, well, we'll just see about that. We'll see about that." That's what Alan Heler said. And so I actually was taken back by that, but I wasn't, because as I said in my last video, I have been going through a lot of racist I don't know what you want to call it, encounters, if you will. I mean, I had one lady that I chose not to invite her to, for the opportunity. I chose not to hire her. And she called and left me a message. And she was a white lady. And she says, you know, Miss Herring, you really made a big mistake by not hiring me. And you know, you're just a bitch. And I actually played that for a friend of mine that came by my office one day, and he's a brother up in Tampa that owns a large trucking company. And he happened to be over in Lakeland, and we were gonna go to dinner. But I said, let me let you hear something before we go, you know. And I played that for him, that recording, and he was just like taken aback, like, what? I said, yes. I said, these people are they are tripped, you know, because the thing is that if I sat in an office with someone and I said to them, are you telling me I can't work here? We'll just see about that. Or they didn't hire me and I called them back and called them all kind of bitches. Or if I walked in the office and looked them up and down when I was going in for an interview and said, well, who made you the manager? I would get stuff like that, you know. But if I called any company back and called the person that I interviewed with all kind of bitches, I'm sure by the end of the day, I would have probably, if not one, two officers at my door saying that I was harassing somebody by calling them a bitch because they didn't hire me. I mean, I had people, not just there, but, you know, just random people. I mean, I had one lady, I was walking out of a client's office, and it was a veterinarian's office, and she just turned around out of the blue and told me to take this back in there. And it was a leash, and she was with two kids. It was her and two little kids, so I suspected that they were her grandkids. And she says, take this back in here. Take this back in there. And I was walking out to my car, and I looked at her, and I said, I would, and I could. I said, but you haven't said please, would I, could I, or thank you. And so I'm going to have to tell you no. And she looked at me and she says, oh, you're just a bitch. You're just a bitch. And I sat in my car looking at that lady, and I said, you know what, if I was out here doing that, and if a white woman didn't do what I told her to do, and I called her a bitch for it, again, I think I'd have probably somebody questioning my mental state. So I was going through a lot of those kind of encounters, and this was in 2004, 2005 maybe. And so when Alan Heler said what he said, you know, are you saying I can't work here? Well, we'll just, because he stuttered a bit. We'll just see about that. And stormed out of my office. I kind of brushed it off to like, this is just crazy stuff. You know, I've never seen any people act like this over a job. And I've never gone into anybody's workplace and asked for employment and then, you know, act like they did me wrong because they didn't hire me or I just didn't fit the bill. But anyway, so a few months later, I noticed I was in the Tampa office because my office was in Lakeland. And I noticed that Alan Heler had got hired in the Tampa office. I never told anyone about him storming out and how he acted, how ugly he acted in the interview. But again, keep in mind, he made sure that it was just him and I. He said, no, Miss Herring, I can wait. I'm not in a hurry. So it was no one else in the office but me and him. When I saw that he was hired over at the Tampa office, I didn't say anything because the Tampa office was the regional office. And he had been there for, I guess, some weeks or so, maybe. I don't know. But I didn't say anything to the regional manager. I didn't want to say, hey, that guy, you know, be careful. That guy's kind of weird, or he's crazy, or, you know, he did this to me. Being in that position, I had some things against me, okay? First, I was young to be a manager. I was a woman, and I was black. So I was always careful about what I wanted to, what information I wanted to share. I'm not a gossiper. I'm nothing like that. So I said to myself, if this guy is, maybe it was me. I don't know as far as what he had an issue with. Maybe it was my skin color. I don't know. But if he is what I think he is, I feel like, well, it'll all come out. If it don't come out in the wash, it'll come out in the rinse, so to speak. The manager will find out that this man is not who he is. And, I didn't want to undermine him, say, well, you shouldn't have hired him because he's crazy, or he did this in the interview with me. You need to be careful, because he had already been hired, and he was working. He had a cubicle in the office. So that was interesting. So to speed it up a bit, it came to an opportunity came my way to take over the office in Sarasota, Florida. And I always liked visiting Sarasota because it's a beautiful, beautiful area. And, they call it the Saint-Tropez of the South. Beautiful beaches, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful scenery. So I was like, when the regional manager said to me, that office is available if you'd like to consider going over there. So I thought about it. He says, well, you don't need to make a, harsh decision. Just think about it. Let me know what you think, in about a week or two. So I was actually in a relationship that was not really I can't even say a relationship, but I was dating one of my clients, a doctor at the time. And I was kind of like, we were spending a lot of time together, but we weren't an item. He was building his practice. I was busy building offices. So, but I think I was more in love with him than he was wanting to be at that time. But anyway, I said, maybe I do need a change of scenery. And I decided to take the opportunity and to go over and take over the office in Sarasota. And when you take over an office in the company, you actually get an override off of the office that you built, an override of the sales. You get a portion of the monthly bonus, and you should have, if you're taking over an office, there should be some stability already there because the office was already opening. You're not starting from scratch. But ironically, it came down to the point that Heler was supposed to move into the Lakeland office. The regional manager actually said to me, I really don't think he's going to make it. Because his sales weren't there. I still to this day don't understand why he was made a manager. However, he was sent to my office before I left because I still had reps there. And he was sent there to basically mirror me and learn from me. However, the last day that he was there, and I could tell that, how there's a feeling of something, like it feels like a tremble, like there's a crescendo effect, or there's something that's, a undercurrent, a rumble, if you will. I felt that when I was trying to show this person certain things about the office. And the last day that I was there, it was around the time, it was the beginning of the year. I believe it was like beginning of 2006. And I mean, at this point I had won awards. I had 3 to 4 solid sales reps working in the office. I was named, district manager, or nominated for district manager of the year with the company. In the region, I was, winning awards. So feeling very good about myself. And So the last day that Alan Heller and I were in that office, I remember sitting down, and it was beginning of the year, so I was writing out the 1099s to sales reps. And I heard the door close. The way the office sat was when you walk into the front door, you can be in the foyer, but the manager's office, my office, was here. So I really didn't see the person until they had to cross the door, the threshold, before I could actually see them. So I heard the door close, so I looked up and I saw a person come right before the door. And I could see that it was Alan Heller. And so I looked, and I could see him stop for a moment to psych himself up. And he was psyching himself up. And he rushed into the office and he says, "Give me your fucking number, you fucking idiot. Give me your fucking number." This is how this man was talking to me in my office. And he says, "Give me your fucking number." And I could feel his, you could feel I could hear his breathing, because he was breathing hard. You know, he psyched himself up, and it was one of those moments when the whole, everything stands still. And I dropped the pen that I was writing with, and I looked up at him. And I said, "What number are you talking about, Alan?" And he said, "Your fucking social security number, you fucking idiot." And I said, "Why?" There was a sale that had taken place, and I guess the commissions overlapped. And since he was to take over that office, it was somehow that he was going to have to pay me, or I don't know if I can't recall if he had already paid. I don't know. But I leaned back in my seat, and it was an office chair, so I had, it had the arms on the side, and I put my arms there like I was putting them on my hip, and I said, I don't think that's necessary, because I really didn't remember if the sale was over $600, because you don't have to 1099 somebody if it's not over, $600. So he stood there just breathing very hard, and I said calmly, I said, "But let me check." So I took out my commissions my commissions, what do you call them, child? Lord. Ledger. And I went through the ledger, and it was like 800 and something, but I took my time, and I remained calm. And the sale was like 800 and something. And I looked at it and I said, "You're right. Give me your fucking number." And I could tell me being calm irritated him and only fueled his fire, because he literally wanted a reaction out of me. So I wrote out on a piece of paper, and I handed it to him. And I said, "Is there anything else?" And he stood there and he says, "Now I have yours too." And he stormed back out of the office. So I heard the door, boom. I heard the door slam. I heard his car crank up, and I heard him leave. And I sat there thinking, what do I do? What do I do now? And there was a window. It was my office sat this way, but my computer was here, so there was a window on the side. When I sat there and I looked out that window, I just stared out that window for I don't know how long, thinking, what do I do now? I'm not one to gossip, and I'm not one to run and tell things. I don't know. I pride myself on handling my own situations. I guess not growing up with a father, and having a mom that really wasn't there. I just kind of got used to handling my own problems in a sense. So I sat there, and I was just thinking, what do I do? And probably an hour or so went by, and I said, I stand. I'm not going to get ran out of here. I'm not going to let nobody run me out of nowhere. And I meant not just out of that office, but out of the company. So I never told anyone that. And I ended up going over to the Sarasota office. And when I got there, all of the large accounts have been removed. The bonus, the monthly bonus that I knew the prior manager that was there was somewhere around $2,500 a month. Now it was at $225. Most of the call center's phones weren't working. There was no internet in the office. And I called corporate, and the office had literally been deemed closed. So I called my regional, and I said, hey, you want to tell me what's going on here? And the response back was, well, there's no room here. So I noticed that since Alan Heler had showed up to work in that company, that the whole atmosphere had changed. I started getting, certain looks from people who usually, who I had known way prior to him, a few years before he even came aboard. But just the whole atmosphere changed. And I had people looking at me sideways. And so I was wondering what type of conversations could this person be having about me? Because it seemed to only come about when he came on board. So I was standing in the call center thinking, again, what do I do now? Here I am. After I've built up, and I built up the Lakeland office. I left it with reps there. I left it with a bonus of $3,000 a month. I built it up to. It was supplied, everything. And $3,000 a month, multiply that by 12, that's $36,000 of my money that I never seen that went directly to Alan Heler. He openly accepted that money. That was mine. Now that's just the bonus. That's not everything else. But standing in the Sarasota office, and at this point realizing, wow, here I am, started over from scratch again. At that time, I probably had somewhere between 150 to 200 clients, mainly small accounts, but I had some middle-sized accounts as well as a few large accounts. And like I said, it's your business. So I didn't want to let those businesses down, my customers down. And I had to think about that. So I'm thinking, what do I do? At that moment, the phone rang. And it was a young man by the name of Harvey Plant. And Harvey worked for me in the Lakeland office. And before working for me, Harvey had a somewhat of a rough upbringing. He had a few run-ins with the law. And I would say that he probably was working in construction before he came in to interview for the position. And I said to Harvey, can you put a tie on for me? If you can put a tie on for me, Harvey, I'd like to offer you the position, and I'd like to offer you the opportunity to come in and work in my sales office. If you can put a tie on and be in on Monday morning with a pen and something to write with and something to take notes with, we're going to get started with training. Fair enough? And Harvey came in. He went through the training with the other reps. And I mean, they were out writing business. And but somehow Harvey, I had just gone out with him, and I closed a sale that paid him probably more than he had ever made in 1 week. And that was about, I think his check was somewhere around $1,700 for one sale that I went out and helped him close. And he called the Sarasota office, and he said, Miss Herring, I called because first of all, I ended up kicking Harvey out of my office because Harvey was in my sales meeting. After he got that check, he was determined to find out but really how much how was the average pay around here? Because when you think about commission only, you know that the following week you're not going to have a check, and your emotions can run amok. And Harvey was in my sales meeting wanting to grill me and pin me to the wall on how much the average person makes there. And I said to Harvey, we can talk about this and more. I said, you just made a check for $1,700. We can talk about this and anything else you want to discuss after the meeting. You can meet me in my office. Harvey wanted to continue. So I said, look here, Harvey, this is what we're going to do. You're going to get your stuff right now, and you're going to get it out of my office. So he was like, I'm not going and just trying to talk. So I said, well, let me tell you something. I went and I got to the supply room. I got a box. I scraped everything off of his desk. I put it in the box. I took it to the car, and I threw it in the car, and I said, goodbye, Harvey. So when I'm at the Sarasota office, standing there figuring out what do I do now that the office has been deemed closed and I'm here and I just gave up everything, my hard work, blood, sweat, and tears over at the Lakeland office, Harvey calls. And I said, what's going on, Harvey? And he said, Miss Herring, I just wanted to call. They told me that I could find you here. I called the Lakeland office, but they said I could find you here in the Sarasota office. And I wanted to call, and first and foremost, I want to apologize because I know I wasn't on my best behavior. But I wanted you to know you kicking me out of your office and giving me that tough love and believing in me. You believed in me, Miss Herring. And he said, y'all, I wanted to say it at the beginning of this video that I'm going to try not to get emotional. And I'm going to try not to cuss too. Because we're not even halfway through this thing. But anyway, stick with me, please. But Harvey said, Ms. Herring, I want to thank you. He said, because of you believing in me and what you taught me. He said, I'm now working in sales again. And he said, I'm earning a real good living for myself. He said, Miss Herring, I'm doing real good for myself. And I get emotional about that because I said to Harvey, I said, what? I said, Harvey, I said, thank you for calling me. I said, you just made my day. And after I hung up that phone, I rolled up my sleeves and I got to work. I don't know, it was just something about I made a difference in that person's life that brought great joy to me and pride. And so I rebuilt that office. Again, I said, they're not going to run me out of here. I said, they're not going to run me out of here. And I rolled up my sleeves and I built that office. Took me about 6 months to get it organized. Took me almost a year to get some reps in there. And again, this is all on my dime. This is all my money. But I went to work and I put it all together and I started winning awards again. However, I remember going to, and throughout this whole process, since Alan Heler came to work, it was like people that I had as colleagues and friends, it was like people were falling off, you know, or like just treating me different. And I didn't know why. But it was because I had relationships with these people prior to Alan Heler coming on board. So I remember being at the last regional, or I think divisional conference that I went to. And I got called on stage to accept an award. And the VP at the time, he introduced me. He says, I'd like to bring Ms. Herring to the stage. She made an awesome speech and got a standing ovation when she was invited to speak at one of our conferences. Please welcome to the stage, Ms. Herring. So I'm walking to the stage, and you hear people clapping, and I'm walking to the stage, and someone taps me on my shoulder, and they wanted to whisper to me, and so I lean over and I'm listening, and they go, I didn't like your fucking speech. And so you got to get to the podium and say thank you after that. And I really don't remember what I said, but those are the kind of things that started happening when this person came on board. That was the last divisional conference I went to. I was at that company for 13 years. And throughout the whole time, I wondered, what type of lie did this man go back and tell for my colleagues and everybody to look at me in a different light? He would gaslight me. He took every opportunity, this person, to verbally assault me when he could. Basically, he walked in my office that day and jacked me for my social security number. You know how in meetings he would do something. You know how a parent might look at a child if they're not to speak or they spoke out of term, and he would look at me and he would look at me like this. And I used to wonder, like, I know these people see him. I know these people hear him saying these ugly things to me, because every chance he got, Alan Heler, every chance he got, he would say ugly things to me. And all I could think was, like, what type of lie could he have told to these people that has bought him the right to speak to me this way? Again, I had so much racist stuff going on. I'm just thinking, well, maybe I'm just in a den of racists. So I remember the last time I saw this person, I had stopped by the Tampa office. And at this time, I was not a district manager anymore, because they ended up finally closing the Sarasota office without any notice. But I remember stopping by the Tampa office, and I had a pretty sizable account that needed an interface, a computer, software interface. And I stopped by there to speak with the regional manager. And the regional manager and I were pretty much done kind of talking, but Alan walked in to turn in some paperwork, and because he had been removed of the Lakeland office, and he was now just a sales rep. But again, that doesn't excuse anything that was, that it never stopped his plight with me. I was there, and I was getting ready to leave when he walked in, but the regional manager says, if you don't mind, Herring, if you don't mind, if you can stick around for a minute, I want to talk a little bit more about that interface. So I sat back down at the table. And after they got finished talking, I was doing something in my planner. And Alan Heler says, well, I sat back down at the table. And Alan Heler, after he finished, he said to the regional, he said, I like this this whole up and down and stuff. He says, you finally taught her how to sit and stay. He said, you finally learned how to sit and stay. Now, I talked about in my last video, is that so? With this situation, I had to use is that so a lot. And with other, racist encounters that I ran into in that business. But when he said that, there was a rush of emotions that came over me. And I said to myself, is that so? I said, after all this time, he never stopped to, he accepted all my money in my office, right? He used to open up my mail and send it to me. He took every opportunity to verbally assault me. He walked into my office and disrespected me, and pretty much I felt in that office, I know if I had not complied with what he wanted, I have no doubt in my mind that he would have gotten physical with me. And I wondered, what type of lie has this person told about me that bought him the right to say and do anything he wanted? And that was the last thing he ever said to me, is that, I'm so glad you finally learned how to sit and stay. And he was walking out. And as he walked out and he passed me, he chuckled and he bent down and kissed me right here. I never forget it. He kissed me right here on my side temple. And I'd like to read to you what I wrote, because I said one day I will write about all of this. When I stood there in my call center in Sarasota, and I realized that I had been duped, and all the large accounts had been removed, and pretty much the bonus had been dwindled down to nothing, and it was deemed a closed office. I said one day I'll write about all of this. And I want to read to you what I wrote about that situation. When he bent down and kissed me on my temple, laughing as he walked out the door. What bought him the right? And like I said, there was a rush of emotions that came over me. He never let up. I said, wow, after all this time. Because I said you'd have to check back with me. I never told him no. And actually, it was my office, so I had every right to tell him no. But I guess since he deemed me a black bitch, as he did, because he said he finally learned how to sit and stay. You finally taught her how to sit and stay. Says, oh, and by the way, boss, I'm glad you finally taught her how to sit and stay. I always knew, y'all. I always knew one day I would write about all of it. That was the only thing that kind of kept me sane. I said, standing there in that call center, I said, one day I'm going to write about all of this. But this is what I said. Before he said that, before he bent down to kiss me on my temple and quickly left the office, laughing. His touching me awakened every nerve in my body, and I felt my right eyelid begin to twitch. And it must have taken all the muscle I had to restrain me from standing up and choking the living shit out of him right there. It's amazing what people will do, say, and allow in front of you when they think you're under some kind of so-called secret spell, or more so when they think that they have gotten away with something. I guess it's kind of like the spell we all seem to be under when we see and witness the general media and shown on social media countless reports of unarmed African Americans being beat, shot, and even killed by police and others and get away with it without any justice or punishment. And after all the civil rights marches, protests, lawsuits, shootings still continue, the beatings and the abuse still continue, and the world just keeps on churning, watching the whole thing play out like an ongoing soap opera that never seems to end. But things were coming to an end at the firm, for me anyway. You see, I thought it all was racism. I sat down and I wrote all of this based on being discriminated against, being having to deal with racial abuse. And I finally walked away from the firm in 2015. And at this point, I guess you're wondering, what does this have to do with identifying Agent Smith? Well, I have to tell you this. I never met Agent Smith. I recognized him. Because you see, after I left, and I was there for 13 years, and I endured those 10 years that Alan Heler was there, I often wondered if he saw this in the paper and decided to just stalk me, or if he saw this in the paper, or someone else saw it in the paper and sent him there. Because you see, like I said, I never met Agent Smith. I recognized him. Every job I went to after that, no matter how big or how small, Alan Heler showed up. Now, maybe not, not in the physical form. It wasn't him in the physical form. But the same scenario, the same modus operandi, the same MO, the same snares, the same lies, the same slander, the same gaslighting, the same attacks, the same setups, the same workplace mobbing, the same thing that Alan Heler did showed up at every job I went to after that. Maybe it was a different size, maybe a different gender, maybe it was a different background, maybe it was a different ethnic, maybe it was a different who knows, country. And at this point, yes, it was the same race. Maybe it was, now we have black people. So at this point, I can take race off the table because now I have black people doing the same thing. So Alan Heler, a.k.a. Agent Smith, showed up. And I wouldn't have recognized him, Agent Smith, had I not said so many times, is that so? Is that so? If you saw my last video, I talked about is that so? And the importance of is that so when you are put into a position of being, when you are being targeted and organized, orchestrated mobbing is being brought against you and stalking is being brought against you. You can't fight every battle. And if I would have off the bat wanted to fight Alan Heler for walking into my office and assaulting me verbally, as well as, like I said, physically, because I never gave him permission to touch me when he bent down and kissed me on my forehead. I never gave him permission to touch me. But this is how comfortable he got. This is how comfortable these people are. So I'm not surprised when I come on YouTube with the small presence that I have and I'm being accused, lied on, attacked. It's just, as far as I'm concerned, Agent Alan Heler, who I met 20 years ago. And he's shown up ever since. Everything that he did in that workplace showed up. And it's not just the workplace. Any opportunity, brothers and sisters, any opportunity that you get, okay, my fellow targeted individuals, chosen ones, you're going to run into this opposition. But the key is sometimes you got to let the opposition throw a punch to see what you're working with, to see what you're dealing with. So we're not surprised or taken off back. We know how to maneuver. And that's how you identify Agent Smith. I never met Agent Smith. I recognized him. And the only way I could recognize him is because I said, is that so? And I watched. And I knew one day I would write about all of it. I was under the impression that I was writing about racism. And once I wrote the book before I actually left the firm. And when I left the firm and what Alan Heler did, when that continued, I knew this was something larger than just racism. And that's when, I went on to do research and found that this is an actual program that people are being put into and lives are being lost and people are suffering and, opportunities are being destroyed. People's livelihood is being, compromised. And that's the thing. They want to be sure that you never, ever, ever become the best version of you. And that's what we're going to talk about on the next video. Okay, please stay tuned. And you guys, I always tell you what the next video is going to be, because I know if I tell you, if I say I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. I promise to be on time. I promise to do as I say. I promise to say please and thank you whenever I can. And I promise to finish what I start. So again, this is the beginning of season 2 of When Gangstalking Gets Real. And look out for the next video of how to best utilize your time when you realize that you've been placed into this elimination program that has fallen upon us, brothers and sisters. So until next time, I'm Lon Diamond, and that's the way it is.